Alright, in this video we're finally going to start creating something in our project. The way we're going to start is by creating some sprites. And a sprite is just another word for a 2D graphic in our game. So any little picture that we put in our game, like a player or a platform or an object, is a sprite. Now, not all images are sprites, and we're going to talk about that later. There's things like textures. So just to play around and get some practice, we're going to use the built-in sprites that Unity has. So in the hierarchy menu here, this is where we actually create everything in our game. So let's right click on here and we want to select 2D object. And you can see we have sprites and then we have various different sprites here. So we can select a type. So let's just pick a square for now. And now we have a square in our game. And this is just a 2D image. Up here you notice it highlights it by default as soon as we create it. So you can just start typing and give it a name. So let's just call this my square or anything you want to call it. And then when you press enter, it's going to save that. Now, if you want to rename it again, you can either slow double click on it here, and that's going to let you rename it. Or if you select it and you come over to the inspector here, we can type a new name up top here. Now this menu here is all of our tools for modifying or transforming one of our objects. So the first one here, the view tool, if we click on this, it gives us a hand. We can just left click and hold, and that lets us drag our view around. So if we want to move where we're working and see something else. Now just note, this isn't moving the object itself, this is moving what we see in the scene view. This doesn't change anything in our game. So if we look at the game tab here, this shows what we see through the camera, which is our sprite. If we go and pan around in here, that has no bearing on this. This is just the world we're looking at. Now you can also use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. And a good practice to get in the habit of doing is using keyboard shortcuts for these. So all of these tools here have the keyboard shortcut starting with Q. So if I press Q on the keyboard, that's going to select this hand or pan tool or view tool, whatever you want to call it here. So just to show that, I'm going to select this one, which is the move tool. Now if I press Q on the keyboard, it moves to the hand. So then I don't have to go up here every time I want to press it. Now we haven't talked about these others yet, but since we're on with keyboard shortcuts, all of these keys are the keys on your keyboard in order going to the right. So we start with Q for the hand, the next is W for the move tool, then E for rotate, R is for scale, then this rect tool is T, and then we have a newer one called transform tool, and that's Y. So just remember, start with Q here, and then every key going forward is going to pick the next one. You're going to use these all the time. These keyboard shortcuts will save you a lot of time and hassle. Okay, so let's go to the move tool. And I'm just going to keyboard shortcut it, so hit W. And now we notice on our game object we have these two arrows. And these are the axis, just like I mentioned in the last video where we have the Y and the X. But the way these work is these are the ones we can move our object with. So if we click on the green arrow, which is the Y, and hold it, now I can move the mouse up and down and it's going to move my object only in the Y. If I try to go left and right, it won't move. Now if I let go, I can do the same thing on the X. Now it's going to move left and right, but I can't go up and down. Now it's a bit hard to see because of the color. So over here we have a component called sprite render and we have color. If we want to change the color of a sprite, we can just click on this and pick any color. So I'm just going to pick, maybe I'll pick like a green. Okay, so now that our sprite is green, if I zoom in a little bit here, I'm going to press Q to use the hand tool, which if you look at it, it's actually called the view tool, but everybody always either calls it the hand or the pan tool. You can call it whatever you would like. Now I'm going to press W, go back to move, and you can see there's this little square inside here. So if you select this square and hold, now we can move it freely on both the X and the Y. And you can even zoom out by scrolling the wheel while you're doing that. So then we let go and now we moved our object over here. And this does change in the game because we moved the object's position. And now another way to move the object without having to use this tool is have it selected, so make sure it's clicked on here. In the inspector, we have the transform component we talked about, and we have our position here. So because we're working in 2D, we don't use the Z. Z is actually the depth, so how far away it is from the view. Since all of our objects are all going to be on the same flat surface, we just leave it as 0. So this would come into play if you're working in 3D. In our case, all we need is the X and Y. So this is just like the last video with the grid. So we have a few options here. If you mouse over the X, you can see the arrows show up on our arrow here. If we click and drag either to the left or right, it's going to go up or down. And we can also do the same with moving the mouse up or down. So the value is going to change based on how you move your mouse. So that's one way. Another way is we can click in here, highlight it, and actually type a set number. So we could give it 2, and now it's on 2 on the X, and then we could go to Y and give it 2 here. So now it's 2 on the Y. And if we zoom in a little bit, just like we talked about on our grid, if we look, the origin was right here, so this is 0. So then we have 1 on the X, 2 on the X, 1 on the Y, 2 on the Y, and that's the center point here. Okay, so that covered movement. The next one here is rotate. So that's this tool, or if we want to use the keyboard shortcut, let's press E. Okay, so now we have 3 different lines here. We have a blue circle, a red line, and a green line. This is how we can rotate the object on a different axis here. So this one works a bit different than the position. So if we click on one of these colors and hold and drag our mouse around, it's going to rotate our object. So if we select the Z, which is the blue one, and we start rotating, notice we can make our object turn in a circle. Now when we're working in 2D, that's the rotation we want to use on the Z. So I'm just going to show you why. If I turn this back, I'm going to set it back to 0. So now if I select, say, the green line to rotate on the Y-axis, notice what's going to happen here. So we're basically flipping our sprite so it's away from the camera. Like right here, it's flipped completely sideways facing the camera, so we can't even see it. And then if I hit Control Z to undo that and do the same thing on the X, notice the same thing happens here. We rotate it this way. And we don't want that either. So Control Z again to undo. So each of these different axes controls which direction we rotate the object. In 2-dimensional, you just want to remember it's the blue one, the Z. That's going to allow us to do this. Okay, so I'm going to Control Z again to undo. Now the next tool is R, which is for scale. And very similar, we have these different axes here. We have the Y. So if we click on that one, we can stretch it out on the Y, which is up and down. And then if we select the red for the X, we can do the same on the X. Now if we want to do both at the same time, I'm going to zoom out a bit here. Hit Q for the pan tool, move around. Let's go back to R. And if you're not good with the keyboard shortcuts yet, you can always go up to this menu and click them. I'm going to try to mention them as much as I can, use them as often as I can in this course, just to get you in the habit of it. But I'll display them on the screen so it's easy for you to see. We can click this center white box and drag up or down and do the same thing. So notice it stretches both out evenly. Now if I was to put this back to say something like this, and now if I click in the middle, it's still going to do it evenly for both. Okay, and again, that's the scale option up here, so we can always do it on here as well. So I could set the X to be 2, and I could set the Y to be 5. And on this one, the Z doesn't really matter either again, so we can just ignore that. And now for the next tool, this is just for working with 2D objects like sprites. So if we click the Rect tool, or we could use T on the keyboard. Now notice it adds these little boxes around our object, and 4 corners have blue circles. If we click on any of the corners of the box and hold, we can just drag this side out as we want. And we could do the same with this one. If we do a corner, we can drag out just those 2 corners and everything will match it. So this is very handy for resizing images and doing it very quickly. Okay, and now the last tool here, the transform tool, which is Y on the keyboard, this is actually just a combination of all of those tools together in one. So I could click on this blue circle to rotate it. I could click on this middle square to resize it. I can click on the green arrow to move it. So everything is in one. This does sound like it would be very handy, but personally I find it just gets confusing. You accidentally click the wrong thing a lot. So it's very rare that I actually use this one. But I would give it a shot to get practice with it. And if you find it works out great for you, then use this. These tools are here to be used whatever works best for you. Now the last thing I'm going to show on this video here is how to delete an object. If we just select the object in the hierarchy here. So you could either right click and select delete, or on your keyboard you can just press the delete key. And now that's going to delete it so we don't have that object anymore.